I find it bizarre just how many theists are completely unaware of how bad people on their side actually look. Even for the few that do realize it, they can't point that damning mirror of truth on themselves. We're going to see another example of that today, though, coming up next. I've been kind of looking for a reason to do a Randal Rauser video for a while now. I've seen a couple of likely candidates fly past in my recommendations, and it really kind of looks like Rauser, who we've looked at in the past, is getting kind of pissed off at Christianity, or at least other Christian apologists. In fact, his channel is now called The Tentative Apologist, and I wanted to see just how tentative he actually is. So this video is called How Christian Fundamentalism Looks to the Rest of Us. And while I don't doubt that he's going to point out all of the stupidity, or at least some of the stupidity, since you can't get all of it into a 4-minute and 30-second video, I just might have to disagree because I don't think the problems are just with the fundamentalists. It's with all theists. So let's get into it and see what he's got to say.
The other day I was down on White Avenue in Edmonton, just at a coffee shop across the street from what is called Pride Corner, which, as you can guess, is a part of the city that's well known for being a gathering place for the LGBT community. But it's also a place where you'll often have Christian fundamentalists like this gentleman show up with a sign and a microphone, bellowing out sermons of stentorian judgment and warnings, uh, as well as punctuated references to the love and mercy of God to passerby and motorists.
I just let that run on for a while, but yes, I think a lot of us have seen that. I used to go to sci-fi and comic book conventions where the religious would show up in droves with microphones and signs and just scream about how all of us heathens were going to hell. That was especially prevalent at one convention that was held over Easter weekend, and as you might imagine, well, the religious were there in force. Now, the fans, they're not shy about speaking their mind, and they started showing up with their own signs and their own microphones, and it kind of became a thing to just go out and make fun of these religious mental midgets. It never turned to violence or anything, at least not that I ever heard, but this went on for years and years and years until I think the police and the convention center started to get tired of it and they just moved the religious nutballs down the street where they were out of sight. Of course, the only reason they were showing up at all was to get on the news, and the moment they were off convention center property, nobody went and took videos of the weirdos on the street corner a mile up the street, so they mostly stopped showing up. Plus, I don't go out to these things anymore, so I have no clue what the scene is really like. If anybody knows, let me know down in the comments, but I don't see it personally, so you know. Anyway, I bring all this up to say that this is not an isolated incident by any means, as I'm sure a lot of people are aware. The religious, they like to do stupid stuff to get attention, just like the little immature children that they are. So please, Randal, keep going. You're doing just fine.
And that's what was happening the other day. So I snapped a picture of the gentleman. I'm going to say I'm sure there are good intentions woven in to what he's doing here.
Oh, we had a couple of dozen lunatics with bright yellow signs showing up. One guy? Yeah, what a piker. Of course, I don't think he'd show up there at all if there wasn't a chance of getting on the news or getting some attention. Because that's why they're doing this. They're doing this for attention. They're not doing it to change anyone's mind. And at least in that picture, nobody's really paying any attention to him. At conventions, they'd be swamped by people making fun of them. And rightfully so. There were far more fans with signs than there were religious freaks, and because people were showing up that knew how to debunk absolutely everything the religious could say, the religious started keeping their mouths shut. It's one thing to be made fun of by everybody around them. It's quite another to make a complete fool of yourself by opening your own mouth. So they just stand there holding their signs like statues, and they would never say a word, which, granted, I think took some of the fun out of it. But these people, they're not really any fun to begin with, are they? So what the hell else is new?
But I think it's also a pretty toxic brew of theology and practice.
But here's the thing. I think all theology is toxic. All of it. Randal's, fundamentalists, evangelical, lunatics, they're all toxic. These guys have made themselves a target, just like the Phelps clan did way back in the day. I don't really think they do it much anymore now that Fred Phelps is dead, but I don't see them anymore. At least they don't wind up in the news as much. Everybody kind of recognizes them as the poor, pathetic losers that they actually are, which is good. And I think they got tired of being made fun of absolutely everywhere they went. So they stopped announcing their activities on their website, although it's still as laughable as ever. I mean, go look at it. It's kind of a peach. I heard that they were planning to protest a school a couple of months ago, but I've got no idea if that ever happened. I never saw any news coverage, so who the hell knows anymore? Really, there's just has-beens now, which is a good thing, but we've really lost some of the people we used to point and laugh at, which isn't really a good thing, because pointing and laughing at these lunatics is what raises the public awareness that these lunatics are out there. Luckily, YouTube is still a thing, and there are plenty of religious lunatics here to take a look at, which is kind of what this channel does, isn't it?
But I didn't always think that. Back in the 1980s, when I was a kid growing up in a sort of a fundamentalist, conservative Protestant tradition, I would have viewed somebody like this as being bold and admirable because Jesus had warned that if you are ashamed of him, then he will be ashamed of you when he returns.
Nobody cares about your book. Now, I think it's great that Randal isn't a fundamentalist wingnut anymore, but he's still a believer, and that's a problem. We know that Christianity is dying a very well-deserved death, and that the first people to go are the liberal and moderate Christians, mostly because I don't think they were all that devout to begin with. This is why I point out that when there are surveys of religiosity in America, you have to be really skeptical about the numbers because there are plenty of reasons to claim belief even if you don't actually have belief. Now that it's more acceptable to be an atheist, and we're at something like 30% of the population last I saw, and growing every day, a lot of the people who are just sitting in the pews for the optics, they're realizing that it's just fine to walk away and admit that they were never actual believers in the first place. That's good, but it leaves behind all the real crazies, the ones who actually believe it, and those are the most dangerous Christians around. Those are the ones more likely to go out and do something unexpected because they really think there's an imaginary man in the sky that's going to rescue them from whatever stupid shit they do. I can't say anything about the lunatic on screen since I don't know them. I have no idea what they believe or anything like that. But how surprised would we be to find fundamentalists showing up at a thing like this wearing a bomb vest? I mean, if the Muslims can find people to do it, the Christians really shouldn't have any problem, should they?
So that created a heady dose of fear and guilt every time we were ashamed to be adequately bold to the world around us, as this gentleman was being here.
And as the world isn't paying any attention to these lunatics, how long is it going to be until they decide they need to be more extreme and take that next step? Now, I'm not recommending this. These people need to grow up and learn how to deal with reality, but I really wouldn't be all that surprised to see these people trying to be bold for Jesus and doing some really crazy stuff as a means of gaining attention. The churches are going out of business, and as we sadly know, there is nothing better for conversions than disaster. I'd like to think that these people have more sense than that, but I honestly don't know. Is there some lunatic religious fundamentalist out there somewhere, any religion really, I don't think it matters, that has their finger on the proverbial button and isn't afraid to push it to make a point for their God? I know this is something that people in charge have thought of. I just don't know that we've taken adequate safeguards. You might need two keys of sorts, just like they do in the movies, but how hard can it be to convert the guy sitting next to you so that you're both crazy and both willing to push the stupid button?
And Jesus also said that the world will hate you because you are mine. And so the more that people here would swear at and curse and shout this preacher on the corner, that would be more evidence that he was in fact being a faithful witness to Jesus. And that therefore would be something that we should look forward to.
Agreed. The people who wrote the Bible understood that the crazier you act, the more people will hate you. And therefore, saying that you're going to be hated, well, that's just a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It drives people toward fanaticism. Well, if they don't hate me now, let's go do something about that. And this is not a good thing because it could push extremists into even more extremism in search of that biblical hatred. So they feel like, well, we're doing what God wants us to do. As the more moderate voices exit, stage left, we're left with fewer and fewer voices to talk these lunatics down. And that is not a good thing. What do you think, though? Let me know down in the comments, because I see there being more problems in the future as Christianity goes into its final death throes, because the ones that are left, the ones who really, really believe this crap, they really have nothing left to lose.
I hope that you can see how, while there's an element of truth mixed in here, it's also a lot of error, which leads to toxicity.
But I'd say that about all religions everywhere. When you can't come to grips with reality, when you're running on pure fifis and faith, then you're going to have problems no matter what you believe. Sure, people on the more moderate end are probably less likely to do anything dumb. I mean, really dumb, dangerously dumb, but they still hold beliefs that are not congruent with actual reality. That's the dangerous part. When you're willing to act without reason, to believe without evidence, you have the potential to go completely off the rails into la la land. And that's true whether you're talking about religion or not. It's just that religion has a built-in get out of reality free card where they believe there's a magical happy land where they get to go no matter how they have to get there. If only they can just prove their allegiance to their imaginary friend. That's potentially dangerous no matter how you slice it.
Because what it does is it provides a negative feedback loop that the more people are opposed by you and repelled by you, the more faithful you are, which must be a pretty distorted understanding of the gospel and Christian discipleship.
Sorry, but taking any of that seriously at all, that's a bad thing. Religion, all religion, is built around the potential for extremism. Well, we have to go out and convert the world. Okay, but what if it's not working? We have to prove to them what's going to happen if they don't. Yeah, I trust you can see where I'm going with this. Now, that's not to say that somebody like Randal Rauser is likely to go out with a bomb strapped to his back, because I don't see that in him. I don't think he would. I don't think he has that mindset. I don't know that somebody like a Steven Anderson would, because I think most of the loudmouth extremist preachers, I think they're only in it for the money and the attention, and they're certainly not going to go and off themselves or get themselves thrown in jail forever, because it just doesn't suit their needs. But that doesn't mean that somebody sitting in Anderson's congregation, the few people who do, with the Bible in their lap and their life falling apart, they might not decide to prove their love for Jesus by doing something insane. We've seen that kind of thing happen. who's to say that it won't happen again or even get worse?
Especially when Jesus so obviously was attractional in his life, drawing people from the margins to him continually, whereas the people Jesus repelled were the religious insiders who were powerful hypocrites, not people existing on the margins of society.
And now you're just going straight off the rails. I know he's making this video for the religious, but I can only respond from my own perspective and saying, obviously, when it is anything but obvious, that just makes him look dumb. There's nothing obvious about it unless you take all of your beliefs on faith, and I don't respect faith one bit. Now, I'll give him this one because I'm not one of his target audience. I just think it's important to point it out because you never know who's going to be watching your videos, and therefore you can't just assume that your blind faith is going to fly with everyone. I'm just going to leave it there though, because that's a criticism that can be leveled at a lot of people online.
But how does fundamentalism look then to people who are not fundamentalists, that is, to the rest of us? And I want to conclude by giving a quick illustration for how people like this gentleman look to people outside of the fundamentalist community.
Well, this is really my point in making this video at all. Yes, fundamentalists look terrible because they are terrible. But you don't really look any better, Randall, at least not rationally. This is where I'm going to disagree a lot with other atheist content creators out there because a lot of them will give non-fundamentalists a pass, whereas I'm not going to. Remember, I've got one and only one standard here, and while I will agree that they're not as bad as the fundies, they don't do things that are as dumb as the fundies sometimes, they're still engaging in magical thinking. They still have irrational beliefs. They are still teaching their children this ridiculous religious mind poison. They are often treating other people like trash. They are voting against things or for things for wholly irrational reasons. The list goes on and on and on. Now, this is not saying everyone has to be just like I am, because it's absolutely not. There is plenty of room for differing opinions, so long as those opinions are rational in origin. There is plenty of room for intelligent discussion between those differing opinions. That's just not possible with a lot of theists. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a discussion that I would say is truly constructive with a theist about their religion, ever. Even the most reasonable results in both sides just walking away, kind of agreeing to disagree. And I don't do that. Yes, you can say that happens in non-religious circles too, and that does, but I think there's a lot of irrational people out there, and those people just have problems. So, as I keep saying, it's not just religion that's the problem. It's irrationality. It's the inability to look at the real world and make judgments based on the facts and the evidence that we have. And I'm not saying that Randall's a complete jackass here. Fundamentalists are definitely bad. I'm just saying Randall isn't really any better. He's just less proud of and less obnoxious about his own personal craziness.
Here is a video posted online just in the last few days of some uh, climate activists throwing cans of soup onto oil paintings. I think it's a Van Gogh painting, and protesting some of their friends who were put in prison for doing precisely the same thing.
Yep, and those people should spend a very, very long time in prison and be forced to pay restitution for having those paintings restored. If they can't be restored, and I haven't looked, I don't know, I assume they can be, but if not, they just bought them all at full market value. Actions have consequences. The idiots on screen are the left-wing version of religious fundamentalists. They are every bit the same level of assholishness and should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Society should never put up with this bullshit. Cart their asses off to a hard labor camp where they can pay off their debt to society, not only to society, but to the people whose property they've damaged or destroyed. Because Fuck these assholes.
And I know these people are well intentioned, at least there are some good intentions mixed in with it all. But for the rest of us, these look like not people who are courageous, not people who are bold, not people who particularly care about the environment, but rather publicity seeking vandals.
Because that's what they are. And if you notice, since I'm trying to keep this at least relatively non political, he brought it up, I didn't. But I have made the case earlier in this very video that the religious are often the same thing. That describes the Westboro idiots perfectly, at least how they used to be. It describes the lunatics who shoot abortion doctors. It describes a lot of people who are out there going, "Look at me!" But that doesn't make you worthwhile. I really wish the media would stop giving these imbeciles the attention that they crave, because if they knew that nobody would ever know what they'd done, a lot of them wouldn't be doing it in the first place. The freaks who went out and painted Stonehenge would never have gotten any media attention whatsoever if we lived in a rational world. They did whatever they did. They should have been caught, hauled back to Stonehenge with scrub brushes and buckets of water, and forced to scrub all of the paint off, and then they should be hauled off to prison, where they should spend a very, very long time there with nobody on the outside ever being the wiser. That would fix a lot of these attention-seeking assholes. But the media doesn't work that way, sadly. It's really a shame that there is no responsibility out there anymore, isn't it? But then again, that's the world that that's the world that a certain segment of the population has made it.
Who end up alienating people from the very cause they want to draw us to.
But that's not why they're doing it. It's why they say they're doing it, but it's not why they're actually doing it. They want to get on TV or the internet and get attention for themselves. They don't really care about their causes. If these people cared about stopping oil, they'd run off and try this in the Middle East, where a lot of the oil is produced. Of course, they'll never do that because they've got some pretty serious consequences that they know that they're not going to suffer here, but if they tried it in Saudi Arabia, they'd probably be dead. And good riddance to them. That's why they're not jumping on planes, because they don't really care about their cause. They care about that momentary blip of attention, and they're willing to take whatever slap on the wrist that they're going to get from it here, because in their particular social circles, they're not heroes. It's not about the cause. It's about them. Let's not kid ourselves.
This is not attractional apologetic witness for the climate activist community or the environmental community. This is a way of repelling people from the very interests that they profess to want to draw us to. And they could have the same logic as the Christian fundamentalist that say, well, we've done our business, and the more that people are repelled by us, the better we are doing our job.
Oh, I agree completely. That's how a lot of these people behave. They think that making obnoxious asses of themselves and pissing everyone off around them somehow contributes to their cause. They're just wrong. But not doing extreme crap doesn't somehow make you better. It just means you're not dancing like a trained monkey in public and making people hate your guts. The people who believe dumb things for bad reasons still believe dumb things for bad reasons, even if they're not out there throwing paint on Stonehenge or Picasso or whatever. It's the belief that's the problem, not necessarily the actions, although yes, the actions get the attention and the consequences for the actions, as they should. That doesn't excuse the idiot sitting on the sideline who believes it every bit as much as the assholes, but they're not out there actively engaging in the activism. It's the beliefs that matter. The actions just make you look worse.
But it's the exact same thing. The way that most of us would be disgusted by these acts of vandalism as a response to protesting climate change and the consumption of oil, so many people are repelled by the preacher on the street corner who bellows at people God's coming stentorian judgment in a way that doesn't draw people to Christ in the way that Christ, in fact, drew people to himself. And so this is the way I believe that Christian fundamentalists are viewed by the rest of us.
But that doesn't excuse you any. It's like watching Steven Anderson, and hell, I've got no idea if he's even a thing anymore. I haven't heard anyone talking about him or seen any of his videos go by on YouTube for a very, very long time now. But the people sitting in his congregation, believing the same things that he does, they're all equally accountable for those beliefs, even if they're not out there making fools of themselves on stage. What they believe actually matters, even if they're not doing any harm with it. I hold people accountable for the coherency and rationality of their beliefs, even if they don't open their mouths and embarrass themselves in public. Now, it's cool that Rauser is calling out the fundamentalists, but he's not evaluating what they believe. He's only looking at their actions. Without their beliefs, their actions simply wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have these people standing there looking stupid if they didn't start with the beliefs in God and Jesus and all the Bible and all that other bullshit in the first place. That's kind of the problem. The beliefs are the problem. It's what this channel is here to point out. It's pointing out the stupidity no matter where it hides. It's showing that these beliefs are simply not defensible, that these things are not supportable with evidence or critical thinking, that this stuff is just embraced emotionally because they really want it to be true. That doesn't make any of it true, and if you don't care if what's in your head is actually true, I don't know what to tell you. You should care. Randal doesn't. I think he's getting embarrassed by the more fanatical believers, but he can't just turn his criticism inward. He can't just say, as I did, maybe I should see if the things I believe are actually true and supportable by the evidence in objective reality. Because he's not interested. None of them are. That's why this channel will never run out of content to debunk. Because people are really, really dumb. And sadly, that will probably never change.